Renata Foster was 35 years old when her husband of 12 years sat her down the night she found out she'd been shortlisted for VP. He didn't ask about her day. He told her he was quitting his job. He said it like a gift, like trusting her enough to carry them both with some kind of romance. He had no idea she'd already noticed the 8 months of missing savings, the hotel charges, the dinners she was never at. He didn't know about the name attached to every one of those dates, buried in his calendar under work sync. He sat there, waiting for her to thank him for his honesty. Instead, Renata stood up, walked upstairs, and pulled a suitcase from the closet. Dominic laughed, certain this was just a mood that would pass by morning. He had no idea the woman folding his shirts already knew exactly who he'd been quitting on, and for how long. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The drive home felt different that evening. Renata Foster had the windows down despite the October chill, her left hand resting on the door, fingers loose. The radio was on, but she wasn't really listening. She was still back in Conference Room B, sitting across from her director, Marcus Webb, who had leaned forward in his chair and said, "Renata, you're on the short list for the VP of Operations role. Wanted you to hear it from me directly." She hadn't jumped up, hadn't screamed. She'd smiled, shaken his hand, and walked calmly back to her desk. Then she'd sat very still for about 45 seconds, staring at her monitor without seeing it, letting the words settle into her chest like warm water. VP of Operations. 12 years of 7 to 7 days. 12 years of fixing what broke, anticipating what hadn't broken yet, and making it all look clean on the other side. It was hers. Not yet, but close enough to feel real. She stopped at the grocery store on the way home, not because she had to, but because she wanted to cook tonight. Something that took time, something worth sitting down for. She picked up salmon, fresh dill, a bottle of white wine she had been saving the occasion for without knowing what the occasion would be. The house lights were on when she pulled into the driveway. She checked the dashboard clock. 6:14 p.m. Dominic was usually home closer to 7, sometimes later, especially on Tuesdays when his team ran their end-of-day check-ins. His car was already in the garage. She noticed it without thinking much of it, grabbed her bags from the back seat and went inside. He was in the living room, sitting, not sprawled. That was the first thing she noticed. He was upright on the couch with the television off, hands resting on his knees, like a man waiting for a bus he'd already decided to catch. "Hey," he said, "you're later than usual." "Stopped at the store." She set the grocery bags on the counter and slipped off her coat, hanging it on the hook by the door. The same hook she'd installed herself 2 winters ago because Dominic kept draping his jacket over the banister. "You're home early." "Wanted to be here." She glanced at him. He was watching her with a kind of careful attention she hadn't seen from him in a while. It read as warmth. She decided to take it as warmth. "Hungry?" she asked. "I was going to do salmon." "Sure." He stood and followed her toward the kitchen, leaning against the counter while she began unpacking the bags. "Actually, can we sit down for a minute, before you start?" Renata set the fish down. She turned to look at him, reading his face the way she'd read faces in boardrooms for years. He wasn't nervous. His jaw was loose, his shoulders were back. Whatever he was about to say, he'd already made peace with it. She pulled out a bar stool and sat. "Okay." He sat across from her at the kitchen island. He took a short breath, not of hesitation, but of a man about to announce something, and said it plainly, almost gently, the way someone delivers news they've decided is good. "I'm quitting my job." A beat. "You can support us." The kitchen was very quiet. Renata heard the refrigerator hum. She heard a car pass outside. She looked at Dominic's face, which was open and calm, eyebrows slightly raised, waiting for her to catch up to what he clearly considered a reasonable thing. He kept going. "I've been thinking about this for a while. It's not working for me anymore. The politics, the hours, it's wearing me out." He said "wearing me out," the way someone says it when they mean, "I've decided I'm done." "We're in a good place financially. Your salary covers the mortgage, the utilities, all the basics. I can figure out the next thing on my own time. It doesn't have to be a crisis." He said we're in a good place, as if he had checked. He hadn't checked. Renata knew because she was the one who checked. She was the one who logged into the joint account every Sunday morning before Dominic was awake, the one who moved money into savings on the first of each month with the discipline of someone who had once gone without. She was the one who remembered his car insurance renewed in November, that his dental was out of network, that they were 3 months away from finishing the HVAC payment plan she'd negotiated without telling him about the interest rate she'd managed down. She looked at her husband's face. He looked back at her, patient, almost proud of himself for being honest. Renata said nothing. She sat with it for 1 breath, then 2. She let the silence stretch long enough that his smile began to soften at the edges, uncertainty starting to creep in around the corners of his confidence. Then she stood up. No words, no questions. She walked past him, through the living room and up the stairs with the quiet, even step of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. She went to the bedroom closet, reached to the top shelf, and pulled down the large suitcase, the one they'd bought for their anniversary trip to Portugal, which she had planned and he had mostly enjoyed. She set it flat on the bed, and she began to pack his things. Dominic was behind her before she'd finished unzipping the suitcase. "Renata!" He stood in the doorway, arms loose at his sides. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She went to his side of the closet and pulled 3 dress shirts from their hangers, the gray one, the blue one, the white one with the small button missing on the cuff that she had promised herself she'd replace and never had. She carried them to the bed and laid them flat. "Hey!" He stepped into the room. His voice was still easy, almost amused. "Come on, Are you seriously packing my stuff right now?" She folded the gray shirt, sleeve to sleeve, then the bottom up, clean and flat. "Renata." He said her name like it was a reset button, like saying it firmly enough would return the room to a previous state. "It's a job. I told you I was done with a job. That's not... You're acting like I said something terrible." She picked up the blue shirt. "Okay." He sat down on the edge of the bed, not far from the suitcase, tilting his head the way he did when he was performing patience. "I get it. You're surprised. I should have brought it up sooner, I'll give you that. But this isn't something to panic about." He paused. "Your salary alone is more than enough. We've talked about that." They hadn't talked about that. He had said it once, off-handedly, 2 years ago, when her raise came through. "You basically carry this house already," and she had laughed it off as a compliment. He had apparently been filing it away as a plan. She moved to his dresser, opened the top drawer, took out his undershirts, folded them in thirds the way she always did when packing for trips, tucked them along the side of the suitcase. "This is dramatic," he said. The amusement was still there, but thinner now. "You know that, right? I came to you honestly. I told you the truth. Most people would appreciate that." Renata smoothed the corner of a folded shirt and said nothing. "I'm not sick. I'm not leaving you." He let out a short laugh. "I just need some time to decompress and figure out the next move. That's it. That's the whole thing." He spread his hands open, like the emptiness in them proved his point. "And you're packing my bags like I told you I was dying." She went back to the closet. His slacks this time. The navy pair, the charcoal pair, the tan ones he liked and she had never understood. He watched her for another minute. The performing patience look faded. What replaced it wasn't anger, more like mild inconvenience. The expression of a man whose vending machine had jammed rather than a man whose marriage was speaking to him clearly for the first time in years. Fine, he said, standing up. I'll go out. Give you some time to calm down. He said calm down with great gentleness, as if he were doing her a favor. He picked up his phone from the nightstand and his jacket from the chair in the corner. I'll be back later. We can talk when you're ready to actually talk. He waited at the door for a moment, maybe hoping she'd look up. She didn't look up. He left. She heard the stairs, the front door, the garage, his car backing out. She listened to it until the sound was gone and the house was only hers. She went back downstairs 20 minutes later. The grocery bags were still on the counter, the salmon still in its paper. She put it in the refrigerator and did not cook. She poured a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened her laptop. She told herself she was just looking at the numbers, just understanding the math. What they had coming in, what they had going out, what it would actually cost to carry both of them without his salary. She logged into the joint account, and she started reading backward through the last 8 months, like a book she hadn't known she was in. The withdrawals didn't announce themselves. They didn't have to. They were small enough, spread out enough, 60 here, 120 there, to blur into normal life if you weren't looking for a shape. But Renata was good at finding shapes. It was, in many ways, the thing she did best. Restaurant names she didn't recognize, then the same ones, repeating. Dinner amounts for 2 on nights he'd told her he was working late. Hotel charges, not far away, not some other city, just 20 minutes across town, appearing on 3 separate Fridays over the spring and summer. She could remember those Fridays. She had been home. She had assumed he was at the office. She scrolled further. The savings line told the rest of it. 8 months ago, his automatic contributions had simply stopped. No conversation, no explanation. The number she had expected to grow had not grown. She had not noticed because she had trusted the system she'd built, had trusted that he was holding his side of it. He wasn't. He hadn't been. Renata sat back from the laptop. She looked at the glow of the screen in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the October wind moved through the oak tree in the yard, and the branches made their small sound against the window. Tonight hadn't been the beginning. She could see that now. Tonight was just the moment he had stopped bothering to hide it. She didn't go to bed. She thought about it. She even walked upstairs, stood in the doorway of the bedroom, and looked at the suitcase still open on the floor with his things folded neatly inside. Then she came back downstairs, made a cup of tea she wouldn't finish, and sat back down at the kitchen table. The laptop screen had gone dark. She woke it up. She had the joint account on one side of the screen. On the other, she pulled up the shared Google Calendar, the one they'd set up 3 years ago to coordinate schedules, her travel, his late nights, doctor's appointments, the occasional dinner with friends. They had both stopped updating it faithfully around the same time they'd stopped asking each other about their days. But Dominic still used it for work. Vaguely, inconsistently, but enough. She started with the hotel charges. The first one was a Friday in March. She found March on the calendar, found that Friday, and looked at what he had written. Work sync. Why? She stared at that for a moment. Then she went to the next hotel charge, a Saturday in May. She found it on the calendar. Sync with why. Moved to weekend. She moved through the rest of them, the restaurant repeats, the dinner charges on late nights, the Fridays that had explained themselves away. Not every one had a matching entry, but enough did. Enough to give the shape a name. Why? She typed the letter into the calendar's search bar. It returned 14 entries across 9 months. Most were labeled some version of work sync or why, check-in, or simply why, as if even the pretense had started to feel like too much effort. Renata looked at the list for a long time without moving. She had worked in operations for 11 years. She knew what it meant when a pattern repeated at regular intervals across multiple data points. She knew what it meant when someone kept using the same shorthand for the same thing. She knew, more than anything, what it meant when the dates aligned. She closed the calendar. She closed the bank account. She shut the laptop. She sat in the dark kitchen with the cold tea and the sound of the oak tree outside and let herself understand it fully, just once, in the quiet, before she put it somewhere useful. He came home at 2 a.m. She heard the door, heard him moving around downstairs, the refrigerator, the cabinet, the television clicking on low. He stayed down there. She stayed upstairs, in bed with the lights off, awake, staring at the ceiling. She was dressed for work before his alarm would have gone off, blazer pressed, coffee made, lunch packed. She was at the table with her tablet when she heard him on the stairs, slow and uncertain, the way he always moved in the morning. He stopped when he saw her, like he'd expected the house to be different by now, softer. "You're up early," he said. "I'm always up at this time." She turned a page on her tablet. "There's coffee." He poured a cup, stood at the counter. The silence between them was not the easy kind. It was the kind that has weight, that has been filled with things neither person has said yet. "You good?" he asked finally. "I need a few days to think," she said. Her voice was level, no heat in it, no tremble, just words placed down one at a time. "I'd like you to stay somewhere else while I do that." He turned around. "Stay somewhere else?" "Just for a few days." She looked up at him then. "Isn't there someone from work you could stay with? You must have people." He read the surface of it and nothing underneath. She watched him do it. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, I can probably crash with someone." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I think this is a bigger reaction than it needs to be, Renata. But if you need space, I'm not going to fight you on space." "I appreciate that." He left that afternoon. He packed a bag, not the suitcase she'd started for him, but his own duffel, quickly, casually, the way a man packs when he expects to be back in a few days. He kissed her on the cheek at the door, told her to call when she was ready to talk, and said with complete sincerity, "We're fine. You know that, right?" She smiled, small, steady. He drove away. She waited until she heard his car turn off the street. Then she picked up her phone and called Preston. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" "I need your help with something professional," she said. "I need to trace 12 months of shared finances. Joint accounts, any accounts in both names, any transfers. I need it clean and I need it complete." She paused. "I don't want him to know I'm looking." A short silence. When Preston spoke again, his voice had shifted into the register he used for work. Careful. Precise. "Do you have access to the accounts right now?" "Yes." "Then I can work with that. Send me the login information through the secure portal. I'll start building the timeline tonight." "Thank you." "Renata." His tone softened just slightly, just once. "How bad is it?" She looked at the empty driveway. "I'll know more once I see all of it." "Okay," Preston said. "Let's find out." Preston arrived on a Thursday evening with a brown leather folder tucked under his arm and a cup of gas station coffee in his hand. That was how she knew he'd been working on this for a while. Preston only drank gas station coffee when he'd already had too much of the good stuff. She let him in. He set the folder on the kitchen table without preamble, pulled out a chair, and sat down. She sat across from him. "Okay," he said. He opened the folder. "Here's what I found." He didn't soften it. That was the thing about Preston. He never dressed bad news up in anything pretty. He just handed you the facts and let you hold them. The first page was a timeline. 12 months of activity across 3 accounts, their joint checking, their joint savings, and a secondary account Renata hadn't checked in over a year because Dominic had said it was just for car expenses. Dates down the left side, withdrawals, transfers, and balances down the right, color-coded in a way only a forensic accountant would think to do. Blue for regular household expenses, red for unexplained charges, yellow for savings contributions that simply stopped. There was a lot of red. There was a lot of yellow that turned to nothing. "The car account," Preston said, tapping it with one finger. "He's been pulling from it steadily since January of last year. Not big amounts, small enough not to spike anything. 30 here, 60 there. He slid a second page across. Cross-referenced with your calendar entries, those dates match restaurant charges and 2 hotel stays I found on a linked card. Renata looked at the second page. The calendar entries were there too. He had pulled them from the shared account, printed them out, lined them up beside the charges. Work sync, Y, sync with Y, move to weekend. Seeing them printed like that, in black and white, on paper she could hold, it made them more real than the screen had. More permanent. When did this start? She asked. Preston pointed to a date near the top of the first page. 14 months ago. Best I can confirm. 14 months. She had been sitting across from this man at dinner, sleeping beside him, covering for him when he came home late, for 14 months. Now here's the part I want you to look at, Preston said. He pulled a third page from the folder and set it down carefully, like it was something fragile. I made some calls. Discreet ones. A former colleague works in Dominic's industry. I asked some general questions about performance patterns. Nothing that would get back to him. She looked at the page. It was a written summary in Preston's handwriting, short and precise. Late arrivals started approximately 13 months ago. Missed a quarterly review in the fall. A second one in the spring. Coworkers noted disengagement. A project he was supposed to lead got quietly reassigned around 6 months back. His manager had documented 2 formal check-ins about his performance in the past year. He wasn't about to quit, Renata said. The words came out flat, not a question. No, Preston said. He was about to be let go. From what I can gather, it was coming within the next few months, maybe sooner. She sat back in her chair. She thought about the way he had said it. I'm quitting my job. You can support us. That easy, generous tone, like he was doing something brave, like it was a choice he was making freely, for them, and she should admire the honesty of it. He hadn't been honest. He had been cornered, and he had turned the corner into a door and walked through it, smiling, and handed her the bill before she even knew the meal had been ordered. He was going to lose that job, and rather than tell her that, rather than come home and say, I've been struggling and I need help, he had rewritten it, packaged it as a decision, framed his fall as a leap, and told her to catch him. She looked at the timeline again. 14 months of charges, 13 months of decline at work, 12 months of drained savings, all of it running quietly underneath the surface of their life, while she had managed their budget, covered shortfalls, and assumed, because he never said otherwise, that they were building something together. Preston gathered the pages, tapped them into a neat stack, and slid them back into the folder. He closed it and pushed it across the table to her side. That's everything I have, he said. The documentation is clean. It'll hold up to scrutiny. He folded his hands. What you do with it is your call. All of it. I know, she said. I mean that. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I know that too. She looked at him. Thank you, Preston. Genuinely. He nodded once. That was enough for both of them. After he left, she took the folder upstairs to the small office at the end of the hall. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk, the one she used for tax documents and insurance policies, and she placed it inside. She locked it again and put the key in her coat pocket. She stood at the desk for a moment. The folder was filed. The facts were in order. The finances were mapped. Now she needed to understand the rest of it. Not the money, not the calendar entries, the words, the ones she hadn't seen yet. Camille showed up on a Friday morning before work. That was the first sign something was wrong. Camille never came by before work. She barely functioned before 9. She was standing at the front door holding a tablet in both hands, the way you might hold something you'd picked up off the ground and weren't sure was safe to touch. Her face was doing the thing it did when she was trying to stay neutral and failing. I found something, she said. Renata stepped back to let her in. Camille set the tablet on the kitchen counter. It was the old one, a gray Samsung with a cracked corner on the case. Renata recognized it immediately. They had bought it 3 years ago for the living room, for recipes and music, and at some point it had migrated to the closet shelf. She had forgotten it existed. It was still synced to his account, Camille said. "He must have forgotten. I borrowed it Tuesday to look something up at your place when my phone died, and She stopped. "I wasn't snooping. I want you to know that." "I know you weren't." "But I saw it. The screen lit up with a notification, and I saw the name, and Camille pressed her lips together. "I read enough to know you needed to see it. I'm sorry." Renata picked up the tablet. The messages were in a thread. Dominic and Yolanda, going back 14 months. Long stretches of conversation, broken up by hours or days, the way two people talk when they've built a habit of each other. Renata stood at the counter and scrolled up to find the beginning. She read from the start. It took almost an hour. Some of it was logistics, times and locations, framed as casually as grocery lists. Thursday works, same place, that kind of thing. But threaded through the logistics were the other things, the things that had nothing to do with where or when. "She's too tired to notice anything anymore," Dominic had written, after a night Renata remembered. She'd worked late on a budget rollout and come home and gone straight to sleep. She remembered it because she'd left him a note on the counter apologizing, and he'd texted back, "No worries, get some rest. Too tired to notice anything anymore." He'd sent that to Yolanda within the hour. A few weeks later, "She dresses like she's preparing for an audit. I don't even know when that happened." A laughing emoji after it. Yolanda had sent one back and written, "Let me guess, sensible shoes?" And he had confirmed it. Renata looked down at her feet briefly. Then she kept reading. In the spring, Dominic had called her predictable. Not in a gentle way, in the way you describe something you've grown tired of, something you no longer bother to engage with. You know what the difference is? Yolanda actually wants to live. Renata has a plan for everything. You can't surprise her. There's nothing spontaneous left. Yolanda had not corrected him, had not said, "She's still your wife." She had written back, "Sounds exhausting, living with the warden." The warden. It showed up again 2 months later, and once more after that. Camille was standing by the kitchen table, arms crossed, watching Renata read. She hadn't said a word since handing it over. That was the thing about Camille. She knew when to be quiet. Renata kept reading until the thread ran out. The last message was 3 days before Dominic had sat her down and announced his plan. He had written to Yolanda, "I'm doing it this week. She'll adjust. She always does." Renata put the tablet face down on the counter. The kitchen was very still. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. "Come sit with me," Renata said. They moved to the living room. Camille sat close, close enough that their knees were almost touching. She didn't offer advice. She didn't rush into the silence with something comforting and hollow. What Renata felt was not what she expected. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something older and heavier than rage. The particular humiliation of learning that someone had watched you work and love and try, and had turned around and described all of it as a flaw. That her steadiness had been read as dullness, her competence as lack of life, her faithfulness as a cage he needed to escape. She had been the warden of a man who had never deserved the house. She let herself feel it, all of it, the full, unvarnished weight of it. Camille sat beside her and let her. At some point, the light in the room shifted, going amber and then gray. Neither of them turned on a lamp. They just sat there while the evening came in around them, quiet and unhurried. The next morning, Renata's alarm went off at 6:15. She got up. She showered. She put on her good gray blazer and the black trousers she'd pressed the week before. She ate half a piece of toast standing at the counter, rinsed the plate, and picked up her bag. She walked out the front door at 7:40. She was at her desk by 8. Odessa's house smelled the same as it always had, cedar and coffee and something faintly floral. A candle, maybe, or just years of the same soap. Renata stood on the front porch for a moment before knocking, breathing it in. The porch light came on before her knuckles hit the door. Odessa opened it in her housecoat and reading glasses, a paperback held loosely in one hand. She looked at Renata's face for exactly 1 second. "Come in," she said. "No, what a surprise. No, I was just thinking about you." Just the door swinging open and the warmth of the house reaching out. That was Odessa. They settled in the den, Renata on the worn love seat, Odessa in her chair by the window, the one she'd sat in for 30 years. She set the paperback aside without marking her page. Another signal. "Tea?" Odessa asked. "No, thank you." Odessa folded her hands in her lap. "You going to make me guess, or are you going to tell me?" Renata had come here intending not to talk. She had told herself she just needed to be somewhere that didn't ask anything of her. But Odessa was watching her with that particular stillness, not patient, exactly, more like inevitable, and Renata found the words had already started forming before she chose them. She told her. All of it. The announcement at the kitchen table. "I'm quitting my job. You can support us." The way he'd said it, like he was doing her a favor. The bank account, the withdrawals, the 8 months of savings quietly bled away. The calendar entries. And then the tablet. The warden. She said it plainly, without dressing it up or softening the edges. That was the only way to say things to Odessa. Her grandmother listened without interrupting. Her expression didn't shift much. A slight tightening around the eyes at the withdrawals, a nearly imperceptible stillness when Renata said the word warden. When Renata finished, the room was quiet. "He told Yolanda she'd adjust," Renata said. "Those were his exact words. She'll adjust. She always does." Odessa was quiet for another moment. Then she said, "And will you?" "No." "Good." Odessa said it the way a judge says sustained, flat, final, moving on. She uncrossed her ankles and pushed herself up from the chair. "Stay there." She disappeared down the hallway. Renata heard a closet open, then the sound of a step stool being unfolded, then a pause, then the soft thud of a box being lifted down. Odessa came back carrying a small metal lockbox and a plain manila envelope, worn at the corners like it had been handled many times over many years, but always carefully. She sat back down and set both items on the side table. She didn't open them yet. "I need to tell you something I should have told you sooner," Odessa said. "And I need you to listen before you react." Renata straightened. "When you married that man," Odessa said, without any particular heat, "I didn't say much because you were happy and because it wasn't my place. But I watched him. I watched how he leaned." She tapped the envelope with one finger. "So I did something about it quietly, the way I've always preferred to handle things." She slid the envelope across. Inside were 2 documents, a deed and a bank statement. The deed was for a small property, a house on Calvert Street that had belonged to Renata's great-aunt, passed to Odessa, now registered in one name only, Renata's. The bank account had been opened 11 years ago, added to steadily in small amounts, and never touched. Both were solely in Renata's name. Dominic's name appeared nowhere. "I never mentioned it," Odessa said, "because you didn't need it yet. A woman doesn't need to announce her floor to know it's there." Renata looked at the documents for a long moment. The deed, the account number, the balance, which was not a fortune but was real. Real enough to matter. Real enough to move. Something shifted in her chest. Not relief, exactly. It was more like a correction. Like a fact she had been computing wrong for months suddenly resolving into its true value. She had spent weeks since his announcement quietly running the math of her own survival. Could she carry the mortgage alone? What she'd have to cut? Whether she'd be building on solid ground or pouring money into a hole he'd helped dig. She had done all that calculation believing she was starting from zero. She hadn't been starting from zero. She'd had a floor the whole time. She just hadn't known to stand on it. "You did this years ago," Renata said. "I did. And you never said anything. You never needed me to." Renata looked up at her grandmother. Odessa met her eyes with the same steady, unsentimental gaze she'd probably used on defense attorneys for 30 years. "He told her I always adjust," Renata said again, slower this time. "I heard you the first time," Odessa said. "The question is what you do with it." Renata looked back down at the documents in her hands, the deed, the account, 12 years of a marriage, and beneath all of it, quietly, a floor. She had never been trapped by his ultimatum. She had simply never needed to test the ground under her feet before. Now she knew what it felt like. She set the documents back in the envelope and folded the flap carefully, the way you handle something you intend to use. Dominic called on a Tuesday. Renata was at her desk when her phone lit up with his name. She let it ring twice, then picked up. "Hey." His voice was easy, relaxed, like a man who had been waiting long enough to feel certain. "I've been giving you your space. I think we need to talk." "Okay," she said. "I mean, really talk, not over the phone." A pause. "I want to come home, Renata. I think we're past this." She kept her voice level. "You might be right." She could almost hear him settle, the small exhale, the recalibration from bracing for resistance to receiving confirmation. "Yeah?" "Let's sit down," she said. "Saturday morning, the house. I'll make coffee." "That's all I'm asking." His tone warmed immediately, climbing toward something that sounded close to gratitude. "And look, I've been thinking about the mortgage situation. Since I'm between jobs right now, the fair thing would be—" "We can talk about all of it Saturday," she said. "Right. Yeah." Another pause, this one softer. "I knew you'd come around." She said goodbye and set the phone face down on her desk. She sat there for a moment, very still. Then she opened her calendar and blocked off Saturday morning. Yolanda's number was in Dominic's contact list, which Renata had copied into her own phone 7 days ago without fanfare. She composed the message carefully, read it once, and sent it. "Hi, Yolanda. This is Renata Foster, Dominic's wife. I have a small bag of yours that ended up at the house somehow. Happy to return it this Saturday around 10. Let me know if that works." Short, polite, just specific enough to seem casual. Yolanda replied within the hour. "Oh, sure, that works. What's the address?" Renata sent it. Dominic was coming at 10 o'clock. So was Yolanda. She called Camille that evening from the kitchen, the folder Preston had given her open on the table in front of her. "I need you to do one more thing," Renata said. "Tell me." "The HR contact at Yolanda's company, the one you mentioned knowing?" A beat. "Marcus." "Yes. I need a name and a direct email. Nothing else. I'll handle the rest." Camille was quiet for just a moment. "I'll text you his information tonight." "Thank you." "Renata." Camille's voice shifted, still steady but closer. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Renata said, and she meant it. She wrote the email to Marcus that night. 2 paragraphs, no drama, no accusations dressed up as questions, just facts, sourced directly from Preston's documented timeline. The dates of the affairs overlap with Yolanda's work calendar, the business expenses charged during those same windows. A note that she was prepared to provide supporting documentation upon request. She read it twice, changed one word, read it again, then she hit send. Preston came by Thursday evening. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, the same table where Dominic had made his announcement, and spread out the final set of documents. He didn't make it feel ceremonial. That was the thing about Preston. He treated seriousness with quiet, not theater. "Divorce filing is ready," he said, sliding one folder across. Your attorney just needs your signature and the date you choose. Renata nodded. He tapped the second folder. Mortgage records going back to the first payment. Every contribution documented by account. His name is on the original deed, but the payment history speaks for itself. He paused. He hasn't made a payment in 9 months. I know. Your attorney can use this to establish sole financial responsibility. It strengthens your position considerably if he tries to claim any stake in the property going forward. Renata pulled the folder toward her and opened it. Rows of transactions, clean and labeled. Her direct deposits, her automatic transfers, 9 months of gaps where his contributions should have been and weren't. Numbers didn't editorialize, they just said what happened. You're in a strong position, Preston said. He wasn't offering comfort. He was stating a conclusion, the way he always did, like a finding at the end of a report. I know that too, she said. He held her gaze for a second, then he nodded once, gathered his copies, and stood. At the door, he paused. You don't need me in the room Saturday. No, she agreed. I don't. Good. He put on his coat. Call me after. Saturday morning arrived gray and cool, the sky low and even, the kind of quiet that settled before a hard rain. Renata woke early. She showered, dressed in a plain black blouse and dark slacks. Not dressed up, not dressed down. Exactly herself. She made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter while it brewed, watching the backyard through the window. The maple by the fence had lost most of its leaves. The yard looked clean, uncomplicated. She carried her mug to the kitchen table and sat down. The folder was already there, centered on the table where she'd placed it the night before. She opened it slowly and went through it one final time. The withdrawal timeline, the calendar entries, the messages from the tablet, the mortgage records, the filing documents. Each page in order, each fact exactly where she had put it. She closed the folder. She finished her coffee. At 9:45, she got up, rinsed her mug, placed it in the drying rack, and walked to the front door to wait. Dominic's car pulled into the driveway at 3 minutes past 10. Renata watched from the front window. He took his time getting out, checked his phone, adjusted his jacket, ran a hand across his jaw. A man composing himself for a conversation he believed he'd already won. She opened the door before he knocked. Hey, he smiled. That easy, familiar smile, the one that used to mean something. You look good. Come in, she said. He stepped inside and she closed the door behind him. He was already moving toward the kitchen, already filling the space the way he always did, shoulders loose, head up, like a man returning to a room that belonged to him. Then he stopped. Yolanda was sitting in the living room. She was perched on the edge of the armchair closest to the window, a small leather bag on her lap, her expression arranged into something polished. That expression cracked the moment she saw Dominic standing in the hallway. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. It felt much longer. Dominic turned to Renata. What is she doing here? Sit down, Dominic, Renata said. Renata, sit down. Something in her voice settled the room. He sat on the couch. Yolanda stayed in the armchair, her posture stiff now, her jaw tight, her eyes moving between the two of them with the careful calculation of someone revising a situation in real time. Renata sat across from them both, the folder on the table in front of her. She didn't open it yet. I'm going to keep this short, she said. She opened the folder. She laid the first page on the table, the withdrawal timeline, printed clean. 8 months of quiet transfers. Restaurants, hotels, charges that matched nothing in her own memory of their life together. These are our joint account withdrawals from the past 8 months, she said, organized by date and amount. She slid the page forward slightly so both of them could see it. This is what you were spending our savings on while I was covering our mortgage alone. Dominic leaned back. Those are not all what you're making them out to be. I'm not making them out to be anything, Renata said. I'm reading them. She laid the second page down. The calendar entries. Yolanda's name, date after date, labeled WorkSync. These are your calendar entries, she said, looking at Dominic. Over 14 months, the dates line up with the charges almost exactly. Yolanda shifted in the armchair. I don't know why I'm here for this. Renata looked at her calmly. You'll understand in a moment. She placed the third set of pages on the table, printed screenshots from the tablet, the messages. She didn't read them aloud. She didn't need to. She simply placed them where both could see. Dominic's jaw tightened. Yolanda looked at the pages, then looked away, her chin lifting slightly. "You went through his phone," Dominic said. Not a question, an accusation reaching for the moral high ground, grasping at nothing. "A shared family tablet," Renata said. "That was still synced to your account." She kept her eyes on him. "You called me, too tired to notice anything." She paused. "I noticed everything." The room went quiet. Dominic opened his mouth, closed it. When he found his words, he arranged them carefully, the way he always did under pressure, not to tell the truth, but to soften the edges of it. "Look, things between us hadn't been good for a long time. That's on both of us. I was in a bad place. That doesn't make it right, but—" "I'm not asking you to explain it," Renata said. "I'm documenting it." She looked at Yolanda. "The affair began over a year ago. During that time, it was conducted partly during business hours, using company devices and, per the transaction records my brother traced, company expense accounts." Yolanda's composure shifted. Not shattered, shifted. The polish thinning just enough to show what was underneath. "That is absolutely none of your business," she said, her voice clipped and sharp. "What happens between two consenting adults is a personal matter," Renata agreed, "right up until it involves company time and resources." She folded her hands on top of the folder. "A formal complaint was filed with your employer's HR department on Thursday. The documentation was included. That process is already underway, separate from anything in this room." Yolanda stared at her. "You had her reported?" Dominic said, looking at Yolanda now, something shifting in his face. Alarm, and beneath it, calculation. "What documentation? What did you—" "She didn't do anything," Yolanda said, her voice rising, her eyes snapping to him. "This is your fault. This whole mess started because you couldn't—" "Don't put that on me," Dominic said. "You knew exactly—" "I knew?" Her voice rose. "You told me she didn't care. You told me the marriage was basically, 'Keep my name out of your mouth.'" "Both of you," Renata said. Not loud, not sharp, just said. They stopped. Renata closed the folder. She set her hands flat on top of it and looked at each of them once, without hurry. "This conversation is over." The divorce papers were filed on a Monday morning. Renata dropped them off herself. She didn't send Preston. She didn't ask Camille to come along. She drove to the courthouse alone, parked, walked in, and handed the envelope across the counter with both hands steady. The clerk stamped the filing date. Renata thanked her and walked back out into the morning. Dominic received his copy 3 days later. She knew because he called. Twice. Then a third time, back to back, with 2 minutes between each one. She let all 3 go to voicemail and listened to them that evening sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her. The first message was confused. "Renata, I think there's been some kind of mistake. Can you call me back?" The second was wounded. "I don't understand why you're doing this right now without even talking to me first. This isn't like you." The third was the one that told her exactly where he was. "The house. I need to understand what's happening with the house. My name has to be on something. Call me." She deleted all 3. She called Preston instead. "He got the papers," she said. "I figured." Preston's voice was even. "He called me too." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I couldn't discuss your financial affairs with him." A pause. "He didn't like that." "No," she said. "He wouldn't." Preston walked her through the last of it on that call, the same careful patience he'd given every step of this. The mortgage had always been in her name alone. She'd qualified for it, she'd signed it, and Dominic's contributions had been voluntary and undocumented as anything legally binding. His name was not on the deed. It had never been on the deed. He had assumed a claim that had never existed on paper because she had never once asked him to prove he'd earned one. He has no standing, Preston said simply. I know, Renata said. I just want to make sure you hear it plainly. I hear it. She did. She heard it the way you hear something you already knew but needed someone else to say out loud before you could fully put it down. Yolanda's review began the same week. Renata didn't hear about it from Yolanda. She heard about it through Camille, who had a quiet word with the HR contact she'd originally connected Renata to, and who confirmed only that the formal process was underway and the documentation had been received and logged. That was enough. What Renata understood, without needing the details, was this. Yolanda had been 3 months from a promotion she'd been working toward for nearly 2 years. Senior Account Strategist, a title she'd mentioned in the messages on the tablet, the ones where she'd laughed about Renata not noticing anything. The review didn't guarantee she'd lose the promotion, but it guaranteed she'd have to answer for herself, formally, in a room where charm didn't move the needle and documentation did. Renata thought about that once, briefly, and then moved on. What she hadn't expected, though she probably should have, was how quickly Dominic and Yolanda fell apart once the consequences became real. Camille heard it secondhand through someone at Yolanda's company. They'd argued, more than once, loudly in Yolanda's apartment. The shape of it was predictable, each one holding the other responsible for the mess, each one convinced they'd been the one left more exposed. You said she wouldn't do anything. You said the marriage was over already. You should have been more careful. You should have told me the truth. Back and forth, 2 people dismantling the story they'd told themselves about each other, finding out that a relationship built on someone else's expense didn't hold up well once the bill came due. By the second week, they weren't speaking. Renata didn't feel satisfaction exactly when she learned that. It was something quieter than satisfaction, more like confirmation, like watching a column of numbers finally balance. She closed the last of the shared accounts on a Thursday afternoon, seated across from a bank officer who walked her through each one without drama or ceremony, the way most important things actually happen. Paperwork, signatures, a folder slid across a desk. Preston had come with her. He sat beside her, said nothing unless she asked him something directly, and handed her a pen when she needed one. When it was done, they walked out to the parking lot together. He squeezed her shoulder once, brief and firm, and then let go. That's everything, he said. That's everything, she agreed. Dominic came for his belongings on a Saturday. She had already boxed what was his. The boxes were stacked neatly near the front door. No ceremony to the arrangement, just practicality. He made 3 trips to his car. He didn't say much, neither did she. At one point, he stopped in the hallway and looked at the wall where a framed photo of them had hung, and she watched his face do something complicated. Then he picked up the last box and carried it out without looking back. She followed him to the door. He didn't turn around. She closed it. The latch caught with a soft, clean click. The floors were the first thing she noticed every time she walked in. Pale oak, refinished down to bare wood and sealed with something that caught afternoon light the way honey does. Warm and slow and without effort. Grandma Odessa's house had been many things over the decades. A home, a holdout, a quiet secret tucked into Renata's name before she even knew she needed it. Now it was becoming something else, something that belonged entirely to her in a way she was still learning to trust. She moved through the front room slowly, a coffee mug in one hand, the other trailing along the newly painted trim. Cream walls. The original crown molding stripped and restored. 2 windows she'd had widened so the light could come in the way Odessa always said light was supposed to, without asking permission. She'd made those calls herself, chosen the contractor, reviewed the bids, negotiated the timeline. She hadn't asked anyone to do it for her. That part had felt important. 18 months had moved differently than she'd expected. Not fast, not slow, just steady. The way her own heartbeat felt steady now when she woke up in the mornings. Even and reliable and hers. The VP promotion had come through 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Her director had called her into his office, said her name had been the clearest choice on the shortlist, and asked if she was ready. She had told him yes without hesitation, because it was true, because it had been true the night she came home with the news and Dominic had cut right across it without noticing. She thought about that sometimes, the timing of it, how she'd walked through her own front door carrying something good, and he'd been waiting not to celebrate her, but to hand her a new weight to carry. She didn't think about it with anger anymore. Mostly, she thought about it the way you think about a door that used to stick, aware of where it was, grateful it wasn't in her way. Camille had helped her pick out the kitchen hardware. 3 Saturday mornings, 2 of which ended with them eating lunch at a small place down the street, talking about nothing in particular. Camille had strong opinions about drawer pulls. Renata let her win most of them because she was right. Preston had come by twice during the renovation. Both times he showed up with coffee and no agenda, walked through the rooms with her, asked practical questions about the contractor's schedule and the permit timeline. The second visit, he stood in the back doorway looking out at the small yard and said, "Odessa would have liked this." "I know," Renata had said. "She picked right," he said. Just that. She hadn't needed to answer. There was someone, now. His name was Marcus. He was patient and quietly funny and entirely unbothered by the pace she set, which was slow and careful and on no one's schedule but her own. He came to her the way good things had started coming to her, without drama, without announcement. He didn't sit at the center of her life. He sat beside it. That felt right in a way she hadn't known to look for before. She had seen Dominic once, from a distance, outside a coffee shop 2 blocks from her office. He was standing with someone, a woman, younger, who was nodding the way people nod when they're listening but already somewhere else. His hands were moving the way they always moved when he was explaining himself, building a case, making the picture look different than it was. Renata had watched for only a moment, then she kept walking. She heard through no one in particular, the way small information drifts without effort, that he was still between jobs, still explaining the gap with language that made it sound like a choice, still landing softly on other people's patience and calling it trust. Yolanda had left her company quietly, some months after the review concluded. The promotion hadn't come through. Her name, once steady in certain professional circles, had grown thin. Renata hadn't looked for that information. It had simply arrived, the way consequences do when they're real. Not loudly, not dramatically, just as fact. She finished her coffee standing in the back doorway, looking out at the yard where she'd already begun planning a garden she hadn't planted yet. Then she walked back through the house, through the kitchen with the drawer pulls Camille had chosen, through the pale-lit front room, past the windows that let the morning in. She stopped in the front doorway. The same frame, the same threshold, different everything else. 18 months ago she had stood in a doorway very much like this one and folded his shirts with steady hands while he talked downstairs. She had made a decision not because she was dramatic, not because she was impulsive, but because she had finally heard what he was actually saying. She stood there now in the quiet of her own house, on her own floor, in a life built to no one's specifications but hers, and said it soft and plain. "The night you told me to support us," she said quietly, to no one, to the open air, "was the night you finally told me the truth." She let that sit. I just heard it first. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day.